Hey guys, if you could go to any place on earth, where would it be? I'll wait. Is it the Maldives, Dubai, or Paris? Well, it doesn't matter, because today we're going to Cyprus. This island looks pretty nice. It's probably your next vacation spot. If you like gyro and kebab, then this island is just the place for you. This island is tiny, nestled at the eastern corner of the Mediterranean. This island is split into not 2, not 3, but 4 pieces. The Greek-dominated Republic of Cyprus, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and the UN buffer zone splitting the two. Lastly, 2 British bases, Akrotiri and Deucalion, remnants of British colonialism. What about the geography of the island? Cyprus consists of the Troodos Mountains in the south and the Kyrenia Range in the north, with the Messoria Plains dividing both ranges. The Akrotiri Peninsula in the south, which has one of the UK's bases, and the long stick called the Karpas Peninsula. The island has a population of about 1.2 million, 800,000 in the south and 300,000 in the north. But how did the island get to this state? Well, we'll have to look at its past. So, grab a snack and relax, and let's delve into Cyprus. Cyprus was first inhabited by elephants and hippos, until humans arrived in 10,000 BCE and drove them to extinction. The ancient Egyptians came along and colonized the island. Then the ancient Egyptians took over, then the Assyrians, Egyptians again, Persians, the Macedon Empire, Ptolemaic Egypt, the Romans, the Byzantines, and then the Third Crusade, which Cyprus was used as a stepping stone for. After that, Cyprus was briefly self-governing under the Venetians, and then the Ottomans declared war on them and Cyprus was under Ottoman rule. The Ottoman rule in Cyprus brought a few changes. Cyprus became a province of Ottoman proper and 2 divisions started forming on the island, the Greeks and the Turks. The Orthodox Church was seen as the administrative power of the Greeks in Cyprus. The Ottomans sent former soldiers to settle on Cyprus on the condition that they would stay there indefinitely. But don't be mistaken, the relations between the two were not peaceful. There was regular conflict and massacres between the two to the point that entire villages would disappear. We'll have to skip to 1869 Egypt, where the Suez was just opened and the British were setting their eyes on Cyprus because of its strategic location. See, Cyprus is called the unsinkable aircraft carrier. It's nearby Turkey, the Levant, Egypt, and Libya. The Ottomans were getting their asses handed to them by Russia, so they met up with the British in Istanbul and offered Cyprus for British support against Russia. So in 1878, Cyprus became a protectorate of the British Empire. The way Britain exploited Cyprus was not by resources, but militarily and economically. The Cyprus colony had to pay tribute to the Ottoman Empire, which they never received. So in 1923, it was converted to public debt and Cyprus had to pay it for the next 50 years. The taxation policy destroyed Cyprus's agriculture. Farmers went bankrupt because of high taxation and interest rates soared to 12%. There were also taxes on immovable property, trade, and profession. Because of high taxation on imported raw resources and a low tax on imported goods, Cyprus's consumer goods sector completely collapsed. The colonial government straight up refused to lift taxes. Higher rent prices were put in the 50s when Cyprus's urban population was increasing. Low export taxes were put to mineral exports, mainly copper, which by the way the island gets its name from. Meaning Cyprus was buying products made with its own resources. Taxation had increased by 700% since 1939. This means the government didn't have money for development and administration, because the tax was being paid to Big Britain. It's a common misconception that imperialist powers developed their colonies in the goodness of their hearts. I mean, come on. But these policies led to Cyprus's economic and societal disaster. After the Second World War, which we're not gonna talk about since not a lot happened apart from Egypt, the British set up a 10-year plan around its colonies, and Cyprus was awarded £12 million, £6 million from the British government and the rest from local taxes and loans. Now obviously the Cypriots were pretty mad, seeing how the British completely screwed them over. For a country that was 75% farmers, agriculture was far from self-sufficient. It made up about 20% of the country's income. In 1951, the UN surveyed Cypriot soil and determined that if conditions didn't improve, it would suffer from a famine 50 to 100 years from then. Which hasn't happened yet, but hopefully so. Farmers who couldn't pay their tax had their land confiscated, being sold to rich landlords or for military use. The government acquired 87,000 acres of land this way. Farmers were poor, still using wooden plows and animals to till their land. About 85% of soil was cultivated this way, and only 4% were cultivated with tractors, which there were only 500. Cyprus was experiencing big population growth, with a 35% growth of population in 4 years. It was pretty clear. Any stagnation or decline in agriculture would mean thousands would go hungry. So, Cyprus stopped exporting and started importing instead. Despite the island, well, being an island, fish was a luxury. But how about Cyprus's other sectors? The British had a monopoly on all imported goods. No surprise. But a couple factories were set up, notoriously Coca-Cola and cigarette factories. But economics wasn't the only interest the British had in Cyprus. It was location. Cyprus was a bombing range to Romanian and Soviet oil fields, and close enough to the Middle East, which was a minefield of oil. This came in handy during the Suez Crisis, where the British had to relocate to Cyprus. NATO couldn't afford giving up such a strategic island, so the US had a big military presence. Strangely, West Germany was Cyprus's biggest export partner, rather than Britain. As you just heard, Germany is split, meaning the start of the Cold War. Surely a strategic island in a hectic region won't get intertwined in a proxy war between the two global superpowers, right? Now, to the Cypriots themselves. A strong independence movement was growing on the island, mainly being the Greek majority desiring a union with Greece, a process called enosis. The Greek Cypriots started a political party called AKEL, which was communist and also had the Archbishop Makarios as their leader. Their end goal was to unite Cyprus with their mother country, Greece. The British didn't see Cypriots as Greeks or Turks, but Orthodox and Muslim. The Turkish Cypriots saw themselves as an oppressed minority protected by the British, and wanted a partition or to join Turkey. This process was called Taksim. A coalition was attempted by the two groups, but resulted with no success due to nationalism. Then, the British set a state of emergency, cracked down and exiled independence figures to the Seychelles. Riots between Turkish and Greek communities started getting the attention of Turkey, which started getting involved in the issue. The exiled figures were brought back. It got to a point where the British and the UN met up in Zurich in 1959. Greece tried to convince the UN for Cyprus to become a Greek state, but had to finally concede that Turkey was now a part in the situation. The Greeks blamed the British for inciting the riots, which brought Turkey into this whole thing. British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan proposed for Cyprus to be divided, but Archbishop Makarios absolutely refused. But at the end, an agreement which both sides could agree to was written. These were the terms of independence. Number 1. Cyprus would become an independent country. 2. Both Taksim and enosis are prohibited. 3. Greek and Turkish forces, at about 3 to 2, are to be represented. 4. The president was to be Greek, elected by the Greeks, and the vice president was to be a Turk, elected by the Turks. 5. The cabinet is to be made up of 7 Greeks and 3 Turks. 6. Decisions will need to be absolutely unanimous to be made, and can be vetoed by the president and the vice president. 7. The UK gets to keep both of its military bases, Akrotiri in the southern tip and Dekalia in the east. Greece, Turkey and the UK are to guarantee Cyprus's independence. So, let's see how Cyprus is now. The Cypriot flag was designed in a way that there could be no red or blue, neutral colors only. A white background, an outline of Cyprus in orange, and 2 olive branches, representing peace between the Turks and the Greeks. Archbishop Makarios became the president, and Cyprus became the 99th member of the UN. But don't think everything was all sunshine and rainbows. The Greeks started trying to remove the protections of the Turks, and the Turks started revolting because of that. Turkey started to take attention to the instability. A plan called Akritas was implemented, and all the Turkish government officials were out. The situation in Cyprus was quickly degrading, so the UN sent a peacekeeping force, but by doing so, they just recognized the Greek majority government, which just kicked the Turks out of their piece of the cake. Inter-community violence was rising, and the UK and the US got involved, fearing a massacre of the Turkish Cypriots, as the inhabited enclaves of a land area of only 3%. Turkey passed a notion to intervene in Cyprus, but a lack of support from NATO and the US prevented it from happening. Despite the instability, Cyprus's economy had a growth rate of 7%, mainly coming from agriculture, tourism, and service sector, since it was a tax haven. Cyprus's agriculture was pretty impressive, with it being the 5th largest exporter of potatoes globally, though Greek Cypriots mainly benefited from this, with Turkish Cypriots being excluded from these opportunities, being stuck in rural areas. Urban areas were pretty developed, with the countryside being neglected in terms of development. In urban areas, Turkish neighborhoods were often segregated. Most urban areas in the south were majority Greek, with Girne or Kyrenia being predominantly Turkish. Meanwhile in Greece, a military junta overthrew the royal government and turned Greece into a republic, which sponsored a coup overthrowing Archbishop Makarios, and instated a pro-enosis government on 1st of July 1974. Their plan was to kick the British out and reunite Cyprus with Greece. In response, Turkey decided that they had enough of their descendants being oppressed in Cyprus and invaded Cyprus 5 days later. Turkish forces occupied about 3% of Cypriot territory, notably the port town of Girne, which then a ceasefire was signed, which lasted for a couple days. The talks broke down with neither side agreeing to anything. The Turks wanted an autonomous state for Turkish Cypriots, but the Greeks refused. Yes, Greece. After the initial invasion, the Greek junta collapsed. The leader Ioannidis was overthrown and Greece became a democracy. At around early August, Greece, Turkey and the UK met up in Geneva and discussed a ceasefire, where Turkish and Greek Cypriot troops would be evacuated to their occupied areas. Greece and Cyprus refused to give up any land and accused Turkey of using the coup as a pretext to invade. Turkey demanded territory and a federal state. The talks failed, and on the 15th of August, Turkey launched another invasion, which was stronger and even better planned than the first. The Turks had already occupied Kyrene Road, thus the Greeks had to use a longer route via Pangara and Pendataktilos. The Turkish command was split into two, one in Konyeli and the other in Ortaköy, and some local Turkish Cypriot fighters with light equipment. The Greek defense consisted of a line division spanning from Vassalia to Karachorio, and a couple divisions in the capital. The Turks started their offensive towards Miamila, which was stalled until armored divisions came in and then retreated. The Greeks were eventually kicked out of the Mesoria plains and retreated to Famagusta. The following day, Famagusta was captured within 2 hours. In the infighting, about 150,000 people, about a quarter of Cyprus's population, was displaced, fleeing conflict and going to their side of the island. Many villages would be abandoned and still are to this day, Famagusta being one of the bigger ghost towns. Greek forces would continue to struggle against Turkey. The eastern flank was left very vulnerable. The Greeks had pretty much abandoned it, and it was left for easy pickings. Meanwhile, forces were retreating to Larnaca. The Centra and Nicosia experienced heavy fighting, but no major changes were made. On the third day, on the western side of the island, the Greeks had retreated to the Troodos Mountains, leaving 2 battalions to confront the Turks. The advances were pretty slow. Marmon was captured at noon, and Limnitis was captured at 2:30 p.m. The Turkish resistance in Kokina was also implemented to the Turkish army. On the 16th of August 1974, a ceasefire was signed by Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, and the UN, ending the conflict with Turkey occupying 37% of the island. A UN buffer zone called the Attila Line was set up. Now let's see Cyprus after the war. Makarios came back to power in December 1974, but he died in office in 1977.
Spyros Kyprianou
Would replace him, but his presidency was quite uneventful. Cyprus was in deep shit. Unemployment skyrocketing to 30% and GDP dropped by 30% as well. The refugees that fled from the north became homeless, so how did the south recover? Well, we'll have to introduce ourselves to Takis Konis. He was left as the head of chief of the Cyprus crisis when Makarios left to the UK. He was in charge of revitalizing Cyprus back to life. He developed a welfare system for refugees and developed a housing plan. Cyprus's unemployment dropped from 30% at 1974 to 2% in 1978. Economy was rising with GDP quadrupling since the war, though putting all the refugees into one area created ghettos, riddled with crime and drugs. With the limited resources, aka aid from the US, UK and Greece, the government's main focus was to house and meet the basic needs of the people, not on mental health or social security. But the key factor that tied into Cyprus's growth was location. No, literally. Cyprus lies in between the oil giants of the Middle East and the EU, which they joined in 2004. This strategic location made it a prime spot to invest in, and with its nice beaches became a place of tourism. Southern Cyprus transformed itself from an agricultural economy to a service sector and tourism-based one, which focused on trade with the EU. So, let's look at the north. Northern Cyprus, poorer and undeveloped, became isolated and sanctioned by the EU. It is pretty much a puppet state of Turkey, relying on agriculture and occasional tourism. A southerner is about 3 times richer than someone from the north. It is not recognized by any other country other than Turkey, and that is what it suffers from the most. Not being recognized. Somaliland, Palestine, Western Sahara, and these Russian vassals. Taiwan and Kosovo, not so much. But if you're not recognized, you can't join economic pacts, the WHO or the UN. You are pretty much at the mercy of other powers, if you're not strong enough, that is. But if you ask me, the reason why Cyprus failed is that there was no Cypriot identity. It was either Orthodox or Muslim, Greek or Turk, but no Cyprus in sight. The relations between Greeks and Turks are already historically tense, And with the failure of the UN Annan plan, where a majority of Turks accepted unity, but the Greeks did not, the talks ended with people dead and a further divided Cyprus. So, what do you think? Will Cyprus unite or will it stay divided? Well, we can guess for now, but the future we can only tell.